Good morning. How is everyone today?
Very good.
Thank you, Ben and Pastor Bob. I really do appreciate the opportunity here. I have to tease you guys a little bit. Amos is a really fun, enjoyable book to spend a couple weeks with. And so, absolutely gorgeous messages in there, but really interesting. And thank you, Melly, by the way, for doing that too. My professor thanks you very much. So, most of you know we're going through the Bible. Today we are in the book of Amos. In about 20 minutes, maybe 15, we've got 9 chapters to hit. But it's going to be a little easier than it sounds. Now, somewhere along the way, the American church, we got this idea that this right here was an easy, happy book. I'm not saying we think that in this room, but I've been in a lot of churches all over the country a lot of years. This is not a tame book. It addresses issues of money and poverty, hard marriages, sex, violence, even racism. Written 2,800 years ago, what we see in Amos is a really brutal prophetic message that a lot of people are saying is for the American evangelical church. Now, I do want to make sure we're clear on something. I don't actually think this angry condemnation refers to this church, the Arlington Vineyard, and I want to make sure you understand that. We are part of Amos' message, but we are not who Amos spends 9 chapters condemning. Okay, you guys follow?
Yeah.
Hard text, we need to know it, not actually directed to us here. Okay, but we got to know it for some important reasons I'll talk about. You said don't go up on this thing, right? There we go. Okay.
How did you do that so easily?
I'm friends with Caleb, so he gives me little hints of how to do this. So, there are many wonderful churches of all denominations in this country. But there is a spirit, not of God, evidenced in some of our strongest churches and leaders. And Amos goes after it. We need to understand the message of Amos because we in this room are called to share the gospel of Jesus to a culture that sees the church, I think too often correctly, like Amos does. People in this culture, in this room, are hurting. And the love of Jesus Christ needs the justice of Amos. So what we're talking about here today is love needs justice. So a little background, who is Amos? Amos is a humble shepherd called by God with a series of messages during the time after Solomon, but before God's people will be conquered. Times are good in Israel and Judah during Amos' time. This is the oldest prophetic book, by the way. They have money, affluence, and power. The citizens with influence have stunning homes, servants, vineyards, fine dining. Religion in Israel is at an all-time high. The music is excellent, liturgy powerful, offerings strong. Preaching each week speaks of God's blessing. However, the poor are an expendable commodity. Wealth and power dominate. The church felt at that time that the more money and sacrifices one gave, the more blessing one would receive. Thus the church in that age came to believe God favored the rich. However, oftentimes wealth was gained by unjust means. A farmer could have one bad crop. He'd seek help for a loan, and the creditor could add fines and fees until the farmer had to sell his daughter, sell his son into economic slavery. Now they were making someone else wealthy, and they went hungry. That creditor could be considered a pillar of the church, if they gave. Ethics and faith were divorced. In the midst of this, they are convinced, quote, we are God's chosen people. I'm just checking, is any of this sounding familiar? A Christian culture convinced that we are the people of God, but more concerned with wealth and power over ethics. So then Amos walks in, and we're going to take a real quick look at a bunch of his words before we get to the main text. I want you to listen to his words to church people. They deny justice for the oppressed. They buy and sell upstanding people. People for them are only things, ways of making money. They'd sell a poor man for a pair of shoes. They'd sell their own grandmother. Wow. Father and son use the same girl and so profane my holy name. And I need to clarify that because there's some confusion. This is not referring to a girl that's a slave or prostitute. She's an innocent girl, probably very young. And this is referring to exactly what you think it's referring to. I have a couple kids in here. This is a profound violation of young women. It is common and it is abhorrent to God. Justice is a lost cause. Evil is epidemic. Decent people throw up their hands. Protest and rebuke are useless. A waste of breath. Then Amos drops the hammer on the church of his day. And this is our main text here. And again, I want to clarify. I do not think this is us. But we need to know the message.
Yeah.
I despise your religious festivals. I cannot stand your assemblies. Even though you bring me burnt and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps. But let justice roll on like a river. Righteousness like a never-ending stream. And I'm not going to read the next slide, but I want you to look at how the Message Bible puts it. I always check the message to make sure it's accurate, and this one is. I want you to read that for a moment. Listen to some of those words. And I love the one toward the bottom. When was the last time you sang to me?
Yeah.
And then when he says, do you know what I want? I want justice.
Yeah.
Oceans of it.
Wow.
I want fairness. Rivers of it.
Wow.
This is a brutal indictment of any church and people that donate their money, praise God, in worship, but fail to see suffering humanity among them.
Mm-hmm.
Amos does not just indict active oppression. We got to know this. He also condemns indifference. To Amos, if people are suffering and the church stays silent, we are guilty.
Mm.
Right.
Now, if I shared that with a room full of American pastors, they would pound the table. I would hear we have food programs for drug addiction, benevolence ministries, how dare you. Bob referenced this actually last week. Because of the rugged individualism in the American church, we do not actually understand sin. The American church, we tend to see sin strictly as personal things, looking at pornography, lust, drugs, excess alcohol use. The most common sin we see condemned in the Old Testament is the abuse of money and power. The gospel accounts follows that up, by the way, particularly Matthew. The sin of our American evangelical context, reflecting the sin of our nation, is unbroken men of money and power. We see that in a church that values performance and control over authentic brokenness before God and each other. And love needs justice. So I want to tell you a couple stories that really illustrate this modern. Okay, because there is a debate here. Does Amos actually refer to us here? And again, I'm not saying here. I'm referring to America, where we're at. I want to tell you a recent well-known church story. I had lunch with one of my Fuller Seminary professors last spring. He's based out of Seattle. And I'm sitting there, and it was just he and I. And I'm with this professor in culture in Christ. And he goes, Mars Hill Church killed the church growth movement in Seattle. Younger adults do not trust pastors.
Wow.
Now, the church he was talking about was planted in 1996. By 2013, it had over 12,000 attenders, over 15 campuses, 17 years. Within 2 years' time, the entire church was shut down and the founder pastor removed by his staff. I'm not naming the pastor here, it's well known. I'm more interested in the story, not the guy, so I'm just going to call him Wallace. Okay, we're going to talk about Wallace. Listen to this. There was no single disgrace or crime that brought Wallace down. Instead, it was a series of accusations of plagiarism, crudeness, a bullying management style, unseemly consolidation of power. Wallace made abhorrent statements about women and male lesbians, his term for men who thought like women. Mama's boys, Larry Limps. He referred to rock-free men who attended churches with female pastors, which, by the way, one of our challenges in the evangelical community, we need more women. That's a separate deal.
I agree.
And he called men that attended Promise Keepers the word for female anatomy. Wallace said in the meeting he didn't want a certain elder who was not slim to take a prominent role because his, quote, fat blank is not the image we want for our church. He referred to the pile of dead bodies behind the church bus of people who do not support the vision and fired board members that questioned him, ordering them shunned by their church family. Now, if that story was isolated, I actually wouldn't share it. It's not. There are many wonderful churches that are nothing like that, so I want to be clear. There are so many great churches in this country. But I got to tell you, the story of Wallace, that's pretty close to the story of my youth pastor in high school, my Bible college, and it's a lot like my 10 years of ministry leadership before finding the vineyard. In successful large churches and ministries, I have witnessed a megachurch pastor scream against a girl dancing at her wedding. And then we learn the pastor had 7 mistresses. The director of a prominent ministry berate his protege, this was a fun one, to collect big checks from donors. Collecting big checks proves you're a man of God. A 14-year-old boy confessed to his pastor that his Christian home is abusive. The pastor has compassion. He prays for him and sends him home, failing to see that love needs justice. The boy goes home that night. In our 20s, many of us in ministry were taught to be strong, not humble. Resolute, not compassionate. Holy, not kind. People were expendable, and the mission of God always came first. No, the mission of God is the people. Unbroken men of power refusing to be broken before a humble God. This is the worship that God hates in the book of Amos. Such a church is not a credible witness of the gospel, rather it is performance art. And love needs justice. The reason this is not indicative of the Vineyard Church I've known for 10 years is simple. We have a lot of really good values, okay? But we have one in the DNA of the Vineyard that has usually saved us. We're not immune, but this value has usually saved us from the American god of money and power. Our faith in the Vineyard is not usually formed in the pulpit, but it's usually formed with relationship with God and with each other. There's a litmus test I always personally use. How long have I gone before I got real about my junk and someone put a hand on my shoulder and prayed for me?
Yeah.
If I am in leadership and that's more than a week or two, I'm probably out of pocket. So now, as we move to the center of Arlington, Amos wants to speak through us the message of the gospel of Jesus Christ. You know, the Dallas-Fort Worth region is full of people that are outside the church.
You're right.
Not because they have rejected Jesus, okay? But because they have never experienced a credible witness of his love.
That's right.
You know, I talk with people throughout the week. Starbucks, Barnes & Noble, Sprouts Grocery, Facebook. In this area, almost everyone grew up in church or was at least in and out. And they still try to attend.
Yeah.
But they're looking for some place that speaks to real-life struggles, not just always personal sin, but also all the junk they have to wade through. And we have to stand with the hurting and present a portrayal of God that is consistent with this book. A God of love, but where love needs justice. We will encounter people skeptical, doubtful. They do not trust the Bible, preachers, or Christians. They are confused and aimless. They have no shepherd to guide them. You know, I want to talk about this for a minute. We are in a shocking new condition in America today. Many urban people and most young adults I know think about the church like Amos does. They know too many preachers that are about money and power. They know churches can be controlling. They hear pastors rail against sin, and they wonder, what is that pastor doing behind closed doors? I need to say something hard, and I know this message has been very affirming so far, hasn't it? Younger emerging adults are not rejecting the church because it takes sin too seriously. They are rejecting the church in America because it doesn't take sin seriously enough. Okay? Because of our individualism, often we don't know what sin is. We always think it's personal. It's often not. Often in the Bible, it is entire cultures. God usually calls a small group out of that culture to confront sin and speak truth back into it. And I kind of think that is us. There is a reason we're in this room. There's a reason each one of us is Vineyard. I love the way this church here has beautifully adopted a block. And as we move to the center of Arlington, we simply need to continue.
Yeah.
And adopt an urban city, and that will mean having compassion on people, many of which don't even like the church.
Yeah.
They may not even like us, but they love Jesus.
Yeah.
Now, for us personally, we have to move past what I would call half a gospel. We have to experience the message of Amos personally in this church. Let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never-ending stream. I talked about this earlier, but people young and old in this culture are in pain. We may be an affluent culture in America, but we are also isolated and hurting. Divorce, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, drug and alcohol addiction, single-parent homes. This is not just an isolated inner-city problem. That is every race, every family, city, suburbs, countryside. Anywhere you look, that is us.
Yeah.
And what does the gospel say? God says, I love and value you. You are forgiven, not just for your sins, but I will also heal you of the sin committed against you.
Yeah.
See, Amos is also speaking justice for our souls. I have a friend of mine, she grew up in church. As a little girl, she was raped repeatedly by her Christian uncle. When she finally told her parents, they swept it under the rug. As a beautiful, brilliant young woman, again, I'm going to edit this real quick, she was making a lot of bad mistakes with guys. Too often, the church starts to speak into her life with, repent, God forgives. Well, that's not actually where Jesus starts. How can she repent of being raped and abused? Jesus, like Amos, first acknowledges her profound pain and injustice. The gospel says that the sin committed against her will be confronted and taken on by Jesus. And Jesus brings justice. The book of Amos, we're going to hit this real quick, does end with justice for the oppressed. It takes a while. You've got 9 chapters of condemnation and 5 final verses where God arrives. And I think it's an allusion to Jesus. On that judgment day, I will restore David's house that has fallen to pieces. I'll repair the holes in the roof, replace the broken windows, fix it up like new. David's people will be strong again. This is the message of the gospel. This is the message we in this room have to experience and then bring to Arlington. The gospel is not a message of pain. It is a message of God healing our pain, restoring our souls. God took on human flesh in Jesus. He allowed himself to be crucified, taking on the sins of the world. All sin falls on Jesus on the cross. Not just what each of us in this room have done wrong. And we've all sinned. We know that. But he also takes on every unkind word we have ever received. The condemnation, the abuse, the degradation. Jesus took on all of it. And he stands with us in our pain. So that when we trust in him, we are free from all sin. Ben, why don't you come up here with me? And then I don't know if you want to get worship going too. I have a couple things I want to say, just leading us to pray. I want each of you guys to ask if there are areas of your life, not just sin, but sin committed against you, that is holding your soul in bondage. We can't bring the love and justice of Jesus Christ to the center of Arlington until we have experienced it ourselves. Amos is our advocate in this text. He's not condemning us here. He's saying, the love of God needs justice. Let me bring justice to you right now.
Amen.
7 years ago this month, I was a puddle on the floor of the Vineyard Church, Duluth, Minnesota. That's way too much a real story. I had just left my 10-year ministry position because they had disciplined me for praying during business hours. That's not a joke. Center directors are not allowed to pray past 9 a.m. I had walked with God as a man of prayer for 15 years, but I was still in a lot of bondage. I had repented, but I needed the freedom that only God's justice could bring. Freedom from a mother and father that abandoned me, a stepfather that abused me, and a church that didn't care. And you know what? God met me 7 years ago. He told me I was his child, that he was my father, and that I never had to fight for justice again. I simply had to kneel in his love. Love needs justice, and justice is found in Jesus' love. I suspect Jesus is touching on some stuff. Years ago, that person who might have called you worthless, a failure, the parent that was not good, the mother that was not there, the boss that discarded you. These are issues of justice. And as people of God, we can't hold on to it any longer. But none of us can just easily let that go. The only path to freedom is giving it to Jesus Christ.
Right.
He brings the justice.
Let's go ahead and stand. Holy Spirit, we just invite you with us. We just say, come, Lord. Come, Lord. This is a powerful message. A message of what your love really looks like for us. God, show us what it means to experience your justice. Experience freedom from those past hurts. We walk out there, Lord. Say, come, Holy Spirit. Show us how to pray.